Kyle Ronan had the kind of life that others envied from a distance. Private jets, towering city offices, global tech deals that shifted markets overnight. He lived in glass buildings, signed contracts worth millions with the flick of a pen, and rarely looked back. But all of that, every ounce of it, faded the moment he stood at the entrance of a hospital nursery, not because of illness, not because of tragedy, but because on the other side of the glass, a little girl with soft brown curls and wide, searching eyes looked up. And he saw himself staring back. She wasn't a stranger. She was his. And no one had told him. Not until now. Have you ever walked away from someone, convinced it was the right thing, only to carry their memory into every quiet moment afterward? That's what Kyle did. Built an empire, but he couldn't forget her. Her voice, her absence, the way she left without slamming doors or shouting, just silence. 3 years passed. Then one night, a single call reopened every part of his past he had locked away. Before we go further, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail and tap that bell icon. These stories aren't just told, they're felt. And if you've ever believed that love deserves another chance, you're in the right place. This is not a story about perfect love. It's about mistakes, distance, timing, and the cost of assuming you'll always have more time. Kyle wasn't cruel. He wasn't careless, but he was absent. And sometimes absence feels like abandonment, even when it's not meant to. Stay with this story, because somewhere between letting go and finding his way back, Kyle discovers something no amount of success could ever prepare him for. A daughter, a second chance, and a truth that would change everything. He hadn't thought about her in months. At least, that's what he told himself. But when Kyle Ronan heard the nurse say her name, her full name, everything around him stilled. Soraya Ellis. Not a memory, not a dream. Real, present, alive. The same woman who once shared his mornings. The same woman who left their penthouse with nothing but her dignity and a silence that never stopped echoing. He hadn't heard from her in years. Not a text, not a photo, no trace. But now, her name had found him, and this time it came with urgency. She had collapsed, alone, and somehow, inexplicably, he was the one listed as her emergency contact. The jet ride to Portland felt longer than any international meeting he'd ever flown to, but it wasn't the flight. It was the unknown. What would he find? Why would she list him? He wasn't part of her world anymore. At least, he thought he wasn't. Kyle wasn't used to feeling helpless. He was a man who solved problems with precision, not guesswork. But that night, standing outside the hospital doors, soaked in quiet panic, he realized something. No boardroom ever taught him how to face the woman he failed, or the past he tried to forget. He was about to walk into a room and come face to face with the consequences of who he'd been. If you've ever had to face the part of your story you hoped was over, you know this feeling. The tightness in the chest, the wish that you could undo just one moment, the fear that it's too late. And what Kyle would see inside that hospital was not just Soraya, but a child, a secret, and a future he never imagined being part of. The nurse didn't say much. She just led him through quiet halls, pausing at a door with soft light spilling beneath it. "You'll want to see this," she whispered. He stepped inside, and there, in a crib by the window, was a toddler, no more than 1.5 years, tiny fingers curled into sleep, round cheeks, a stuffed giraffe tucked under one arm. And those eyes, they didn't ask for anything. They just looked up, calm, steady, recognizing she didn't know him, but somehow she knew him. His knees nearly buckled, because what he saw wasn't a coincidence or a maybe. It was undeniable. The same shade of brown as his mother's, the same slight dimple on the left cheek, the same shape of silence in her gaze. His daughter. He didn't ask for proof, didn't need a test, didn't question why Soraya never told him. All he could think was, how much of her life have I already missed? Some truths don't land loudly. They settle into your chest like weight. And when they do, they change everything you thought you valued. This was one of those truths. He sat down beside her, careful, awkward, unfamiliar with the smallness of a child's breath. He didn't speak, not out of shock, but reverence. There she was, his second chance, sleeping quietly, waiting to be known. In that moment, the empire he'd built felt distant. His calendar, his deals, his deadlines, irrelevant. All he wanted was time. Time to hear her laugh. Time to be chosen. Time to undo absence with presence. Stay with this story, because what follows isn't a return to romance for show. It's not about perfection or pity. It's about showing up, about the quiet courage it takes to rebuild trust, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent moments. It's about the kind of love that doesn't leave this time. And now, let me take you back to where it all began, before the hospital, before the daughter, before the silence, to a man who didn't believe in softness until he met her. He had never needed more than control. Kyle Ronan built his empire from steel focus and emotionless precision. His company, Ronan Tech, had turned silent algorithms into global power. Cities ran smoother because of his systems. Markets trusted his name. Investors followed his lead like it was law. He spoke with certainty, made decisions in minutes, and treated mistakes as threats. There was no room for confusion, no tolerance for unpredictability. His office, a corner unit high above Manhattan, was sleek and silent. Glass walls, cold lighting. The only photo on his desk was of a building he'd constructed, not a person he loved. To most, Kyle was respected, admired, even feared, but never known. Because Kyle Ronan never let anyone get close enough to know him, Soraya Ellis had no interest in power. She didn't follow market trends or stock movement. She followed sunlight across floorboards. She found beauty in the way paint bled softly into canvas. She once cried at the sight of an elderly couple holding hands in a coffee shop, not from sadness, but because their love felt earned. She was an interior designer, one who never chased magazine features, only meaning. She liked repurposing forgotten spaces, soft light, texture, story in every corner. Soraya didn't crave recognition. She craved connection. She believed warmth was the strongest kind of strength, and her world was smaller, but brighter. Her apartment in the East Village was a blend of deep colors and handmade touches. Plants that thrived in quiet corners, books stacked beside the bed, the smell of cardamom and old wood, music that lingered even after it stopped. Her life wasn't loud, but it was alive. They weren't supposed to meet. He was a keynote donor, barely present at the charity art show, more interested in escaping early than mingling with artists. She was adjusting the lighting on an exhibit, climbing a step stool, frowning at the two harsh shadows falling across a sculpture. She didn't notice him at first, but he noticed her, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. While others performed their charm in designer suits and clinking glasses, she moved with quiet purpose, mumbling to herself about the angle of the light. He walked closer, curiously. "Do you talk to every lamp you meet?" he asked, not looking at her, but the installation. She blinked, then smiled. "Only the ones that refuse to cooperate." He chuckled. "A real one, rare." It surprised them both. They spoke for 10 minutes. It felt like 5. She didn't treat him like a CEO. She didn't fawn. She didn't ask what he did. She asked what made him feel at peace. He didn't know how to answer. She told him hers, long walks with no destination. He didn't know what to say to that either, but he stayed. Later that night, Kyle found himself thinking about her laugh, and how somehow it had made him forget the constant thrum of pressure he wore like skin. Kyle didn't reach out right away. For a man used to calculating every move before making it, he wasn't sure how to approach someone like Soraya. She didn't fit into a meeting. She wasn't a box to check or a problem to solve. But 3 days after the art event, he walked into her studio. No assistant, no warning. He didn't even have a plan. She was barefoot, kneeling on a rug, arranging swatches by color and mood. The space smelled like bergamot and paint. You always show up to people's workplaces without calling? She asked, without looking up. I didn't have your number, he replied simply. She raised an eyebrow. Yet here you are. Beat passed. I wanted to see what light looks like when it listens to you. She laughed, short and sharp. That was either terrible or poetic. Maybe both, he said. That's how it began. Not with a grand gesture, but with an awkward attempt. And for reasons she didn't quite understand, Soraya let him stay. He sat beside her on the floor as she explained her current project. A meditation space that evoked calm through minimalism and texture. He didn't understand half of it, but he listened and asked questions, real ones, not to impress, but to understand. They started seeing each other after that. At first, it was slow, intentional. Coffee on Sundays, long walks after work. They had no need for loud plans or curated experiences. A shared bench, a quiet bookstore, a silent car ride with soft music. It was enough. They teased each other constantly. She once told him he wore his tie like it was choking him on purpose. He told her she decorated spaces like she was preparing a nest for a secret bird no one else could see. Their laughter was not loud, but it lingered. He showed her the city through his eyes, not the towering offices, but the quiet views from high windows. Rooftops at night, the sound of distant taxi brakes when everything else was quiet. She showed him how to breathe without needing to fix anything. They talked without filling every silence. Some nights, they just lay on the floor of her apartment, fingers brushing, a candle flickering somewhere in the corner, not speaking, just being. She asked about his childhood once. He answered her fully, for the first time in his adult life. Not because she asked perfectly, but because she listened, like it mattered. Their connection didn't follow rules. It wasn't structured. It simply was, and it grew, quietly, deeply, without either of them needing to name it too soon. The proposal didn't involve flashbulbs or rose petals. There was no skyline view, no photographer hiding in the distance. Just two people lying in bed after midnight, her head on his chest, the window open, the soft hum of the city below. He hadn't even planned to ask, but something about her breathing, steady and close, made him say it. Marry me. She didn't move, didn't look up, just let the words settle in the room. Then whispered, without hesitation, okay, that was it. No fireworks, no performance, no script. Just a decision that felt inevitable. They married at City Hall 2 months later. No big ceremony. 2 close friends as witnesses. He wore a suit he already owned. She wore a dress with sleeves that fell gently at the wrist. They signed the papers, held hands, walked to a quiet restaurant afterward, and shared a meal without talking much. But there was something beautiful about it. The simplicity, the calm, the way her hand rested on the table between them, like it had always belonged there. Their apartment was a blend of both their worlds. His minimalism, her warmth. She added small pieces over time. A soft throw blanket on the armchair, handmade bowls from a local ceramicist, dried lavender in the entryway. He didn't question any of it, and eventually, without realizing, he started coming home earlier. Sometimes just 30 minutes, sometimes more. They had routines. Pancakes on Sundays, even if they were burnt. Weekly walks through Washington Square. Wednesday nights, they sat on the couch reading different books, legs touching, not speaking. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He began to let her in. Not all at once, but in pieces. She saw him during the in-between moments, when he was tired but didn't admit it, when a deal fell through and he didn't, to speak for hours, when the weight of the world sat on his shoulders, and all he needed was her hand on his back. And she gave it, every time. She didn't ask him to change. She just made space for him to soften. And somehow, he did. Not loudly, but noticeably. He laughed more, slept better, stopped checking his phone during dinner, most nights. One night, she looked over at him mid-sentence and froze. He was watching her, quietly. "I'm happy," he said, not because something remarkable had just happened, but because nothing had. Because for once, nothing felt like enough. If you've ever seen opposites attract, Drop a heart in the comments. Have you lived a love that felt like light in your darkness? The turning point was small, as most are. A missed call, an unanswered text, another night with cold food waiting on the stove. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just started wondering, is this what love becomes when no one's paying attention to it anymore? Kyle didn't notice the shift right away. To him, success meant providing, securing their future, staying 10 steps ahead of uncertainty. To her, success was slower, softer, shared. They were living in the same space, but walking in opposite directions. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't careless, but he was absent. One night, she sat on the couch with a cup of tea, staring at the front door long after he was supposed to be home. The clock passed midnight. The tea turned cold, and she whispered to herself, not in anger, but acceptance. He's not coming back tonight. Maybe, not really at all. That quiet moment was the first real goodbye. The rest just hadn't been said out loud yet. Kyle's calendar became the third presence in their marriage. Mornings started with updates from overseas branches. Evenings blurred into strategy sessions and late calls with advisors. His eyes were always scanning. Not hers, but numbers, headlines, metrics. He would walk in and drop his briefcase by the door, still speaking into a headset. She'd wait for a greeting. Sometimes she got one. Most times she didn't. The shift wasn't sharp. It was subtle. He was still technically there, but he stopped really being with her. She started marking dinners on the calendar, not to control his time, but to gently remind him that she existed outside of the silence. Sometimes he showed up. Sometimes he forgot. Other times he arrived halfway through, kissed her on the forehead, and said he'd already eaten with the board. She always said it was fine, even when it wasn't. She stopped asking him how his day went, not because she didn't care, but because his answers never changed, and he never asked about hers. She bought a new teapot once, a little thing, ceramic, hand-glazed, a deep emerald she loved. He didn't notice it, not the first night, not the second, not after a week. It sat on the stove like a quiet metaphor, present, useful, overlooked. She started journaling again, not for clarity, but survival. Pages filled with her efforts to be patient, her notes about the version of him she missed, the version who once waited for her to fall asleep before closing his eyes, who walked her home even when they lived in the same apartment, who said, "I see you," without words. That man had gone quiet, and in his place stood someone with a sharper jaw and tired eyes. Successful, yes, but emotionally unavailable in a way that didn't feel temporary anymore. She began to shrink her hopes to fit the reality. She stopped planning movie nights, stopped waiting up, started going to sleep alone, telling herself it was normal. It wasn't hatred that grew between them. It was distance and disappointment. The intimacy faded first, not abruptly, but in pieces. First, the shared showers stopped. Then, the spontaneous touches. Then the long talks in bed after the lights went out. They still touched, occasionally, still kissed goodbye, but it felt more like habit than hunger. She tried to bring him back in small ways, lit his favorite candles when he came home, started reading up on his company's newest launch so she could ask questions he might care about, suggested they take a weekend off, just one, somewhere quiet. He nodded, distracted. "We'll talk about it," he said. They never did. One night, she found him asleep at his desk, suit jacket still on, phone still lit in his hand. She covered him with a blanket and turned off the light, then stood there for a while, watching the person she loved become a stranger in front of her, slowly but surely. In the morning, he thanked her. He kissed her cheek and said he had a meeting to prepare for. That was it. He never noticed she had been crying in the kitchen just an hour before, or that her voice was quieter now. Not by design, but from fatigue. She wasn't waiting for a crisis. She wasn't even waiting for change. She was just holding on, hoping something would shift on its own. But life rarely shifts on its own, and the weight she carried, alone, was growing heavier by the day. Their third anniversary was coming up. Soraya didn't mention it for weeks, not because she forgot, but because she didn't want another polite, "Let's see what my calendar looks like." So she made the plan on her own, a cabin tucked away in the woods just outside Vermont. No cell service, no email, just space. She booked it weeks in advance, handwrote the directions, made a playlist for the drive, simple music, soft edges, the kind that reminded her of their early days, back when they still shared headphones and laughter came easily. She packed 2 bags, one for each of them. Kyle hadn't said no. In fact, when she mentioned the idea, finally, he looked up from his laptop, nodded, and said, "Sounds peaceful." It was the first time he'd used that word in months. Her heart swelled. The day before the trip, she lit candles in the living room, made pasta with garlic and white wine. His favorite. She played that playlist low in the background, waiting for him to come home so she could give him the printed itinerary, the directions, the bag she packed. He walked in just after 9. Tie loosened, eyes tired. He kissed her cheek, tossed his phone on the counter, and sat on the couch without a word. "I booked us something," she said, handing him the folder. He opened it, flipped through the pages slowly, then set them down. His voice didn't rise. It didn't break. "I can't go." 3 words. That's all it took. "There's an emergency acquisition meeting in Dubai. I leave tomorrow morning." He said it like a weather report, like it wasn't the anniversary they never celebrated last year because of a product launch, like she hadn't spent 3 hours choosing snacks for the road just so it would feel like a little adventure, like she hadn't been trying for weeks, in quiet, constant ways, to remind him that they still had a life worth returning to. She nodded, not fast, not slow, just once, then stood, walked into the bedroom, and began folding her clothes back into the drawer. He followed her. "Soraya." "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was so even it startled them both. "No, I know it's disappointing. I said I'm fine." She didn't raise her voice, didn't throw anything, didn't demand he choose her. She just kept folding, then zipped up the suitcase she had packed for him and left it by the front door. She didn't sleep that night. He didn't notice. He left at dawn. The door shut gently behind him. When he returned, 4 days later, the apartment was still. The lavender was gone. The teapot was gone. The books, the plants, the quiet touches that softened the edges of his life, all gone. Only the furniture remained. There was no note, just a key on the kitchen counter. The divorce wasn't loud. It wasn't televised. No scandal, no statements, just 2 signatures and silence. No one from their circles even knew they were married, let alone separated. It was as if they disappeared from each other's stories, like a chapter that got skipped. But chapters leave echoes, and hers lingered. He didn't fight it, didn't beg, didn't chase, because by the time he noticed how far she had gone, she had already been gone for a while. In the months that followed, he buried himself in work. He launched new platforms, secured new deals, made headlines, and never once opened the drawer where she used to keep her scarves. Because even when you try to forget someone, some parts of them stay. 3 years passed. Ronin Tech had tripled its market value. Kyle's face appeared on magazine covers and financial broadcasts. He launched an education initiative, cut the ribbon on an AI research center, and keynoted in 5 countries in under 8 months. He smiled for the press, shook hands, delivered speeches about innovation and responsibility, but in the quiet moments, between flights, between meetings, between the questions people asked, Kyle Ronin felt unfinished, not broken, just incomplete. He kept everything as it had been. The apartment, the layout, the empty side of the closet. Even the tea Soraya used to buy still sat in the kitchen cabinet, unopened. He never touched it, never threw it out either. He wasn't holding on. He just hadn't figured out what to do with absence. In October, Kyle flew to Seattle to speak at a global tech summit. He didn't want to go, but the organizers had built the schedule around his name. So he boarded the plane, checked into the hotel, reviewed his talking points, delivered his keynote. Perfectly. Afterward, he stood near the back exit, loosening his collar, scanning for his driver. And that's when he saw her. It wasn't a spotlight moment. No dramatic music. No crowd parting. Just a quiet realization. There she was. Coat wrapped around her. Hair longer. Face calm. Still. She was standing near the doors, speaking softly to another woman, laughing at something just beneath her breath. She hadn't seen him yet. His first instinct was to look away, not out of anger, but fear. The kind that came from not knowing what your voice would sound like if it had to say her name again. But before he could decide, she turned, and their eyes met. Neither of them moved at first. It was too fast, too real, too sudden. Then, a small nod, a step, and another, until they were standing just a few feet apart. "Hi," she said softly. He cleared his throat. "Hey," she smiled, uncertain. "I didn't know you'd be here. I wasn't planning on it." "Last-minute request." "Same," she said. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. The silence stretched, not awkward, just full. "Want to grab a coffee?" he asked, surprising them both. She tilted her head, amused. "At 9:30 at night? There's a spot across the street. Still hate decaf? Still pretend I don't?" She smiled again. "All right." They didn't talk about the past right away. Instead, they let the moment breathe. They found a corner table near the window, ordered drinks, watched people rush past on the sidewalk, lives crossing in blinks. She told him about Portland, about a small design studio she was helping build. Clean lines, sustainable materials, slow work with meaning. He told her about the summit. The travel. The board. His words were practiced. Hers weren't. Still, he listened. "I thought you'd be in Europe by now," she said. "Was supposed to be," he replied. "Didn't feel like going." She sipped her tea, looked at him over the rim of the cup. "You seem tired." He laughed once. "I am." That opened the door. Not all the way, but just enough. They talked for hours. Not about blame, not about what went wrong, but about the things they never got to share. The hikes she took when she needed clarity, the book he kept meaning to write, but hadn't started, the way silence had filled their absence with too many assumptions. He apologized once, not with a speech, just 4 words. "I should have shown up." She didn't argue, didn't reassure, just looked at him like she understood more than she could say. The cafe emptied around them. The barista cleaned quietly in the back. Time slowed, without either of them noticing. Eventually, Soraya leaned back. "We should probably go." Kyle nodded. Neither of them moved. They stepped out into the night. The streets were quieter now, the city humming in a lower register. Neither of them asked where the other was going. They just walked, side by side. No brushing hands, no forced closeness, just quiet. Kyle glanced at her once. Her expression was unreadable, the same way it had been the day she left. Except now, it held something softer. Not hope, but a kind of peace. "I still think about Vermont," she said. He looked over. "The cabin?" She nodded. "I packed your bag. Even your socks." "I know. I sat at the table that night for almost 2 hours before I put the food away." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "I know." They reached his hotel without thinking. She paused at the entrance. He didn't ask. He didn't assume. He simply said, "I'd like you to come up." Not as a demand, not as an escape, just an invitation. She held his gaze, then nodded once. The room was quiet. She stood near the window while he took off his jacket. There was no rush between them, just familiarity, stillness. They didn't fall into each other. They moved carefully, as if afraid too much weight would break what was left. His hand brushed her shoulder, and she closed her eyes. She pressed her forehead against his chest, and he exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. No promises were made. No questions were asked. Just closeness, honest and human. Later, They lay in bed, not speaking, just breathing in the same rhythm. Her head rested on his arm. His fingers traced small circles along her back. She whispered, "I missed this." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence, for once, said everything. The clock moved without their permission. And sometime near morning, sleep found them both. When Kyle woke, the space beside him was empty. At first, he thought she was in the bathroom, but the door was open. The room was still, too still. Her coat was gone, so was her bag. He sat up slowly, ran a hand through his hair, looked at the side of the bed she'd occupied. Then, at the empty chair by the window, there was no note, no message, just the scent of her perfume, faint in the air. He didn't curse, didn't panic. He just sat there, alone, as daylight crept in, blinking against a truth he already understood. She came back for one night, not to stay, not to reopen old wounds, but to feel for a moment the warmth that once lived between them. It wasn't closure. It wasn't a new beginning. It was a pause, a heartbeat, a reminder that something had existed, even if it no longer did. Kyle didn't call her, not that day, not the next. He told himself it was because she left on her own terms, and that, maybe this time, she needed to be the one to decide what came next. But deep down, he also feared the answer. Some nights, he thought of her, of the way her hand had rested on his chest, of how she whispered, not out of desperation, but memory. He didn't try to forget. He just tried to live. But fate wasn't finished with them, and somewhere across the country, Soraya carried a secret, one that grew quietly, day by day, a heartbeat of her own, a piece of their unfinished story, still forming, still waiting. It started with small signs. She felt it before she confirmed it. The tiredness that settled into her bones, the nausea that came without warning, the subtle shift in her sense of balance. At first, Soraya thought it was stress, a cold, a late period brought on by too much thinking and too little rest. But when the third morning came, and her body refused food she usually craved, she bought a test. Just one. She sat on the floor of her bathroom and waited, not pacing, not panicking, just waiting. The result appeared faster than she expected. 2 lines, clear, certain. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stared at the small object in her hand, like it held more than a result, like it carried a future she hadn't planned for, but couldn't ignore. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was Kyle. His name didn't come in anger. It came in quiet recognition. Of course it was him. Of course that one night, the only night, would change everything. She made tea, sat on the couch, let the weight of the truth rest beside her. Her hand drifted to her stomach, instinctively. She didn't know what to say, to herself, to the life inside her, to the man who wasn't here. She picked up her phone. His name sat at the top of her recent calls. She tapped it, let it ring once, twice, then ended the call before it connected. She told herself she'd try again tomorrow, but tomorrow came, and the next, and still, she didn't press send. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was that she remembered him. The Kyle who forgot dinner, the Kyle who missed anniversaries, the Kyle who loved through absence, who provided everything except presence. Could that man be a father? Could she survive watching him try? Days turned into weeks. She drafted a message one morning. "I have something to tell you. It's important." She stared at it for an hour, then deleted it. Another time, she stood in front of her mirror, practicing what she might say if he answered. But when she imagined his voice, calm, careful, distant, her stomach turned. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was afraid that bringing him into this would turn something gentle into something complicated, afraid that he'd want control, not connection, that he'd give his name but not his time. And she wasn't willing to raise a child in half-love, so she made a decision, not out of pride, not out of punishment, but protection, for herself, and for the small life growing inside her. She would do this alone. Portland became more than a place. It became a rhythm. Mornings with herbal tea on the balcony. Afternoon walks through quiet streets. She found a midwife, bought secondhand baby clothes, painted a small room in soft earth tones. She didn't tell anyone at first, not even the friend who had taken her to that tech summit. For a while it felt like the pregnancy belonged only to her, like it lived in a space that couldn't be touched by the outside world. And in that stillness, she began to feel something she hadn't in years. Peace. The first time she heard the heartbeat, she didn't cry. She smiled, small, steady. It was fast, rhythmic, alive, not a thought, not a plan. A person. She would talk to the baby at night about the little things. What the clouds looked like that day, what fruit she had for breakfast. Which songs made her smile. She never used names. She just called her Little Light. By her 7th month, she had grown used to the shape of motherhood, not in its physical form, but in the way it recentered her. She no longer woke up with Kyl's name on her mind. Not because she had forgotten him. Still, there were moments. Tiny ones. She'd be folding baby clothes and wonder if the child's hands would look like his. She'd feel a strong kick and think, he should know. But the thought never lasted long, because every time she tried to imagine what that conversation would lead to, it ended with him not showing up, or showing up once, and then slowly fading just like before. She couldn't risk that, not for this child. The labor came early in the morning. A slow ache in her back, a stillness in the air. She lit a candle, put on soft music, called her midwife. The house was quiet, but not lonely. Hours passed in waves. She breathed through each one, held her own hand between contractions. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She just let her body carry her forward. Naya arrived just after noon. 8 pounds, 1 ounce. A small cry, strong and clear. The midwife placed her on Soraya's chest, and for the first time in her life, Soraya cried without needing to explain why. She named her Naya, a name that meant new beginning. No middle name, no last-minute change, just Naya, pure, whole, hers. Later that night, as the baby slept, Soraya stared at her daughter's face. She saw pieces of herself and him, the curve of the mouth, the shape of the eyes, a familiar furrow in the brow. But Naya didn't carry Kyl's absence. She carried presence, a new kind, the kind that asked nothing but love. Soraya filled out the hospital forms carefully. There was a space for the father's name. She left it blank. Not to erase him, she whispered, "You are loved," and that, for now, was enough. It was just past 10. The city outside his window moved like machinery, precise, constant, indifferent. Kyle sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled, collar open, the glow of the monitor, casting a soft halo on paperwork that had long blurred into noise. Another acquisition deal, another partnership negotiation, another night spent managing success that no longer felt like anything at all. His office was silent, the kind of silence that didn't soothe, but hovered. He glanced at his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, not for any particular reason, just habit. Nothing new. He set it back down. His assistant had left hours ago. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. He was alone, by choice. He often stayed late, not because he had to, but because going home no longer meant rest. It just meant more silence, in a different room. His hand hovered over a contract when the office phone rang. Not his cell, not his private line. The office phone, the one that only rang for formalities or errors. He stared at it. Once, twice. It rang again. He answered, "Kyle Ronan." A pause, then a voice, clipped, professional. "This is Portland General Hospital. Are you available to confirm your identity as an emergency contact for a Ms. Soraya Ellis?" The name didn't hit like a memory. It hit like an alarm. He stood up, before realizing he had moved. "Yes," he said quickly. "Yes, What happened?" She was found unconscious by her neighbor, admitted to emergency care 2 hours ago. She's stable now, but you were listed as the emergency contact. We need your consent on potential next of kin documentation in case... What? Kyle asked, breath catching. The nurse paused. In case her condition changes. His chest tightened. Not the kind that stirs panic, the kind that stops time. He wrote down the address, confirmed his credentials, ended the call, stood there for a full minute, then another. His hands didn't shake, but they didn't move either. Soraya, the woman he hadn't heard from since that one night, the woman who had once been his anchor, and then, just as quickly, his memory. The woman who, for reasons he still didn't understand, had disappeared again before he could even ask her to stay. And now, she had written his name into something that mattered. Emergency contact, out of everyone. She had written down his name. Within minutes, his mind moved into motion. He called for a driver, booked the next available flight, had his assistant reroute his meetings. But underneath the logistics was something else entirely. Something raw, unprepared, and rising. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't even try. He just sat in the back seat of the black sedan on the way to the airport, staring out the window as the streets passed without sound. His heart was calm. His mind wasn't, because this wasn't about a woman he once loved. It was about a woman he never stopped loving, even if he never said it out loud, even if he buried it beneath contracts and headlines, even if he'd convinced himself he had moved on. The terminal was half empty. Kyle stood near the gate window, arms crossed, watching the lights blink along the edge of the tarmac. His flight wouldn't board for another 30 minutes. He didn't sit, didn't check his phone, didn't open his laptop. He just stood there, eyes fixed, posture still, the same way he used to stand during company crises, except this time, the problem wasn't one he could prepare for. He replayed the nurse's words again and again. She's stable for now. For now, 2 words that carried more weight than anything in his briefcase. The last time he saw Soraya, her head had rested against his shoulder, her breath steady in sleep. No promises spoken, no future agreed on, just quiet. And when he woke, she was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. He told himself she had made her choice, that she was free to leave again. But somewhere beneath that logic, he carried a quiet ache. She had come back for one night. And he hadn't asked her to stay. He boarded the plane without speaking to anyone. First class felt like a cage. The leather seat, the tray table, the safety instructions, all of it blurred together. He stared out the window and didn't see the sky. He saw her. He remembered the way she used to hum while folding clothes, how she would press her lips together when deep in thought. A small habit he never mentioned but noticed every time. He remembered her laugh in the car after they got lost on the way to a wedding, and how she refused to use GPS just to see where the road goes. He remembered the warmth of her hand during that one winter when they stood outside for an hour just watching people ice skate. She was never loud. She never demanded the spotlight, but she filled rooms, and without her, every space he walked into felt thinner. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle. He ignored the offers of drinks, kept his seat reclined just enough to pretend he was relaxed, but his fingers wouldn't stop moving. They tapped his knee, his armrest. They folded into fists, released, folded again. What would he say when he saw her? Would she even want to see him? Would she be awake? Would she be angry that he came? Or grateful? He didn't know, and the not knowing made his chest tighten. Somewhere over the mountains, the plane dipped slightly. Just turbulence. But for a moment, it reminded him of how fragile things were, of how quickly everything could shift. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket. No new messages, no missed calls. Not that he expected any, but a part of him had hoped, without reason, that maybe someone, somehow, would tell him what to expect. No such luck. He closed his eyes and whispered something he hadn't said in a long time, not to himself, not to her, but to whatever part of the universe was still listening. Let her be okay. The plane landed just after 4 in the morning. The sky was still dark, The air felt colder than he remembered. He stepped outside and inhaled deeply, not because the air was fresh, but because it grounded him. A car waited at the curb. He gave the driver the address. The ride was silent. He didn't watch the city pass. He stared at the folder in his lap, the one that held his ID, hospital documents, emergency contact confirmation. When they pulled into the hospital driveway, the lights above the entrance flickered slightly. Not broken, just tired, like the rest of the world at this hour. Kyle stepped out of the car, straightened his coat, and walked toward the doors, not with confidence, not with certainty, but with something more honest. Hope. The glass doors slid open with a soft hush. Kyle stepped into the lobby, the overhead lights cool and sterile. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and something harder to name. Fear, maybe. Or finality. He walked to the front desk, his voice low and steady. "I'm here for Soraya Ellis. I was listed as her emergency contact." The receptionist checked the system, nodded once, and handed him a laminated badge. "Third floor, room 312. You'll be met by a nurse." The elevator ride felt longer than the flight. Every number that lit up only deepened the pressure in his chest. He wasn't used to not knowing, not used to powerlessness. But here, in this building, none of his titles mattered. He was just someone who cared. When the doors opened, a nurse greeted him with a clipboard. "She's stable," she said. "Still resting. She's been under observation since late last night. We're monitoring her closely, but she's expected to recover." Kyle nodded, but the words barely reached him. The nurse hesitated, then added gently, "She asked for no visitors, but since you're on her emergency file, we've made an exception." Room 312 was at the end of the hallway. He paused at the door, took one breath, then another, and stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was how small she looked in the hospital bed. Her skin pale, her hair tucked behind her ear. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside her, a reminder that she was alive, but vulnerable in a way he had never seen. This wasn't the Soraya he remembered standing at gallery installations, making design decisions with quiet confidence. This wasn't the woman who once told him she didn't need anything fancy for an anniversary, just attention. This was someone who had carried a weight he couldn't see, and now that weight had taken its toll. He walked slowly to the chair beside the bed and sat down. Didn't speak, didn't reach for her hand, just sat there, watching her breathe. His eyes scanned the details, the chart clipped to the bed, the call button in her reach, a folded cardigan on the windowsill, her phone face down on the tray table. No photos, no flowers, no signs of anyone else having been there, just her. Kyle leaned forward, studied her face, the lines that hadn't been there 3 years ago, the curve of her mouth, still familiar, the way her fingers twitched slightly, even in sleep. He didn't know how long he sat there, minutes, maybe an hour. At one point, he stood and poured water from the carafe beside her bed, set it down gently, adjusted the blanket near her feet. None of it made a difference, but he did it anyway. A quiet knock at the door broke the stillness. The same nurse stepped in, her voice low, careful. "There's someone I think you should meet." Kyle turned, confused. The nurse gave a small nod and motioned for him to follow. He glanced back at Soraya one last time, then stepped into the hallway. The hallway curved gently before opening into a small viewing area. Soft lights, large windows, a quiet hum from the monitors inside. The nurse led him to the far side. A glass panel separated them from a room filled with cribs, each tucked neatly in a row. But Kyle didn't need to scan them all. He saw her immediately. Tiny frame, curly dark hair, a button nose. She stood in a playpen near the far corner, holding a small plush giraffe. Her fingers wrapped tightly around one of its legs, her wide eyes fixed on the nurse entering beside her. The nurse bent down and whispered something to her. The little girl turned her head toward the window, and Kyle felt the air leave his lungs. She blinked, looked at him, not with fear, not with confusion, just calm, almost curious. Her gaze didn't shift. It held, like recognition, like something in her knew something in him. The nurse beside Kyle broke the silence. Her name is Naya. He said nothing. Couldn't. His eyes were locked on the child. His child. He didn't need to ask. He didn't need a test. It was undeniable. The shape of her mouth, the structure of her cheekbones, the quiet steadiness in her stare. The nurse continued, softer now. Her mother listed you as the emergency contact, just in case. The words settled like weight in his chest. She kept his name. Not for convenience, not for drama, but in the event that something went wrong. She trusted him to protect what mattered most. Even after all the silence, even after all the distance, he stepped closer to the glass. Naya tilted her head slightly, still watching him, still holding that toy, still waiting. He whispered her name to no one. Naya. It felt foreign and familiar all at once. If this moment hit your heart, leave a comment below with, "She kept his name," so we know you're feeling it too. And don't forget to share this story if you believe in second chances. Kyle didn't cry, but something in him softened, unraveled, not in collapse, but in quiet surrender, to a truth he hadn't expected, to a connection he hadn't prepared for. He didn't knock on the nursery door, didn't ask to hold her. Not yet. He just stood there, taking in every detail. How small she was, how still, how utterly real. Minutes passed, then the nurse touched his arm gently. "She'll be moved to the pediatric room in a few hours. You're welcome to stay." He nodded slowly, still watching her, still unable to pull away. He returned to Soraya's room in silence. She hadn't woken, but he sat beside her again. This time, his hand found hers. He didn't speak, but his grip said everything. "I'm here. I saw her. I know now. And I'm not going anywhere." The room was dim when she opened her eyes. A soft gray light spilled through the curtains. Soraya blinked slowly, adjusting to the shape of the ceiling above her. Her body ached, but nothing felt urgent. Machines clicked quietly beside her. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled. And then she felt it, a hand holding hers, warm, steady. She turned her head. Kyle. He didn't notice at first. He had drifted into a shallow sleep, head bent forward, shoulders rounded. She stared at him for a while, taking in the lines that hadn't been there before, the gentle crease between his brows, the way his hand wrapped around hers like it belonged there. When she finally whispered his name, it barely made a sound. "Kyle." His eyes opened instantly. Relief came first, then something heavier. He sat up straighter, his grip tightening just slightly. "You're awake," he said, voice low. She nodded. "I'm okay?" He nodded back. "They said you will be." She swallowed. Her throat was dry. "How long have you been here?" He didn't answer right away. "Since they called me." She looked away. Her voice was softer now. "You came?" "I did." A long pause followed. Neither rushed to fill it. She looked down at their hands, then slowly, gently, pulled hers back. "I didn't mean for you to be brought into this," she said. "That wasn't the plan." "I know. I wasn't trying to shut you out," she continued. "I just didn't know how to bring you in without losing myself again." He nodded, not defensively, not hurt, just listening. "You never stopped being important to me," she said, eyes welling. "But I didn't trust that you'd know how to be present. Not in the way she'd need, or I'd need." Kyle leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't know either," he admitted, "but I'm not here to rewrite the past." He looked up, and his voice leveled. "I'm here because I don't want to miss any more of her life. Or yours." She blinked back tears. This wasn't a speech. It wasn't rehearsed. He looked exhausted, not from travel, but from truth. "You don't need to make decisions now," he added. "I'm not asking for space. Or forgiveness." She looked at him carefully. "Then what are you asking for?" "A chance to show up." The words settled between them. No lightning. No music. Just truth. She gave him the smallest nod. "Not a promise." But permission. And for Kyle, that was everything. Kyle didn't go back to New York. He didn't ask where to stay. He rented a small house 10 minutes from the hospital, modest, furnished, with a quiet backyard and creaky floorboards. When Soraya was discharged, he didn't hover. He just asked what she needed. Sometimes she told him, sometimes she didn't. Either way, he stayed. The first time he held Naya, she reached for his collar. Not with hesitation, but with calm curiosity. She didn't cry. She didn't lean away. She just sat in his arms, studying his face like she'd seen it before in pieces and was finally putting it together. He fed her with clumsy hands, held the spoon wrong, got applesauce on his sleeve. Naya giggled, delighted. Kyle grinned, helpless. He learned how to change a diaper by watching a tutorial twice and failing once. Soraya watched from across the room, arms folded. He didn't ask for help. He just muttered to himself until it was done. Not perfect, but done. And the next one? Better. He read bedtime stories every night. At first, his voice was stiff, flat, but by the fourth night, he was doing character voices. By the seventh, Naya reached for the book before he even sat down. Soraya noticed things, like how he washed her bottles without being asked, how he folded laundry one shirt at a time, slower than she would have, but careful, how he waited until Naya was asleep before checking his phone, and how sometimes he didn't check it at all. He didn't try to take over. He followed her lead, asked questions when needed, stepped back when not. There was no performance, just presence. One night, Soraya walked into the living room and found them both asleep on the floor. Kyle, flat on his back, Naya curled against his side, one small hand resting on his chest. She stood there for a while, not smiling, not crying, just still. He didn't bring up the past, didn't ask why she never told him. He didn't need to. He understood, and somehow, that mattered more than any apology ever could. She started inviting him to stay for dinner. Then longer. He started learning her patterns again, the way she bit her lip when thinking, how she tucked, her feet under herself on the couch, how her silence wasn't distance, but attention. One evening, as Naya splashed in the bath, Kaya leaned against the doorframe. "She has your eyes," he said. Soraya smiled softly. "And your stubbornness." He laughed, quietly, then paused. "She's the best thing I've ever been part of." Soraya met his eyes, steady, wary, but softening. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not." She nodded once, turning back to the tub, and in that moment, something shifted. Not everything, but enough. Time didn't rush forward, it gently unfolded. What started as temporary became routine. Kyle stayed, not because he said he would, but because he did. Mornings became familiar. Kyle would arrive early, coffee in hand, one black, one with oat milk and cinnamon for Soraya. He never assumed. He just remembered. Sometimes Soraya greeted him with a tired nod, other days with a quiet smile. Most days, Naya squealed the moment she heard the key turn. "Up, up," she'd yell, running barefoot. There was no montage music, no sudden montage of forgiveness, just moments, small, quiet, human moments. One afternoon, they built a fort from blankets and couch cushions. Kyle wore a paper crown. Naya dubbed him King of Books and made him read Goodnight Moon 3 times. Soraya watched from the doorway, heart caught in her chest. She didn't say anything, but she stayed there, longer than she meant to. One Saturday, it rained, not heavy, just soft, steady. They stayed in, made pancakes shaped like animals, danced barefoot on the rug, sang off-key to old records. Kyle didn't check his email, not once. He bought her a bookshelf, not for Soraya, for Naya. They filled it together, one book at a time. Each story he read, each question he answered, each kiss on the forehead. Brick by brick, he was building something he never thought he could. Home. Then came the moment. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't expected. Naya had fallen and scraped her knee. Not badly, just enough to panic. Soraya knelt down to soothe her, but Naya cried harder, and through hiccuped sobs, she looked past her mother. "Daddy." Kyle froze. So did Soraya. Time held its breath. He knelt beside her, gently brushing hair from her face. "I'm here," he said. Naya reached for him, and in his arms, she stopped crying. Later that night, Kyle sat in silence long after she'd gone to bed. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying. He was still, like something sacred had happened, and his heart didn't quite know how to hold it. Across the room, Soraya watched him. Neither spoke. There was no need. Something between them had shifted, not loudly, but undeniably. The days folded into each other. Dinner together became the norm. Not always romantic, not always light. Sometimes Naya refused to eat vegetables. Sometimes Kyle burned the rice. Sometimes Soraya was quiet for reasons she didn't explain. But still, they gathered. They sat. They stayed. Kyle didn't ask for more. He gave space. He gave time. And when Soraya pulled back, he didn't push. He just remained present. It was the first time she'd ever seen him patient with emotion, not waiting to fix it, just willing to feel it. One night, as they put Naya to bed, she asked for both of them to read. Together, she insisted, arms wrapped around the book. So they sat, one on each side, their voices alternating. Soft, layered, rhythmic. When they finished, Naya looked between them. "You both stay?" Kyle glanced at Soraya. She nodded. So they did. That night, after she fell asleep, they lingered in the doorway. Neither moved. Neither looked away. It had been a long time since silence felt comfortable between them. "I didn't know if you'd stay," Soraya finally said. Kyle didn't flinch. "I didn't either." She tilted her head. "But you did." He nodded. "Every morning I woke up, I asked myself, what would I've wanted my father to do? And then I did that." Soraya's lips parted slightly. "That was never about me." Kyle looked at her now. Really looked. "It became about you. About her. About us." She held his gaze. No promises. No pressure. Just a pause. A breath. A moment shared in equal weight. Soraya stepped forward. Not rushed. Not cautious. Just steady. She reached for his hand. Held it. Warm. Human. Real. "I never stopped loving you," she said. Kyle's eyes softened. "I just started learning how to love right." And then, not with fanfare, not with music swelling, she leaned in and kissed him. Not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a quiet agreement that something new had begun. They didn't label it, didn't explain it. They just walked back inside. Together. Later that night, Naya stirred in her sleep. Kyle rose, tucked her blanket in tighter, and sat by her side. Soraya watched from the door, arms crossed, heart full. And in that stillness, they became a family. Would you give someone a second chance after this? Tell us your thoughts below. And if you believe healing is possible, hit that like button. Show this story some love. Kyle had the title, the power, the wealth. His calendar was full, yet his home was empty. Presence isn't about proximity. It's about attention. All those late-night strategy meetings, all the calls taken mid-dinner, the flights that felt more important than face-to-face time. None of it held weight the moment he saw a tiny pair of eyes that mirrored his own. When Soraya left, it wasn't in fury. It was in quiet resignation, because being next to someone who's emotionally elsewhere is lonelier than being alone. How many relationships do we try to hold with words alone? When was the last time you gave someone undivided presence, not multitask love? Soraya didn't keep the secret out of revenge. She kept it out of fear. Fear that the same story would repeat, that Kyle's empire would consume their second chance before it had breath to live. But silence isn't safety. It's suspension. Every unsaid truth, every drafted message she never sent, became another wall between the past and peace. And yet, even in silence, she left the door cracked. By listing his name at the hospital, she didn't slam it shut. She left a whisper of possibility. What truth have you been holding? Is your silence truly protecting someone, or is it protecting yourself from vulnerability? Kyle didn't win her back with a grand speech. There was no dramatic declaration, no speech under the stars. He simply showed up. He read bedtime stories, learned lullabies, showed up early, stayed late. He was awkward with diapers, clumsy with toy assembly instructions, but present. That's what healing looks like. Not flowers at the door, but breakfast made. Not a gift, but consistency. Soraya didn't fall for his promise. She softened because of his pattern. When we break trust, no apology is louder than our behavior. If you're seeking redemption, start doing. Let your actions explain you before your mouth ever tries. There's a myth in romantic storytelling that second chances are automatic. They're not. They're forged in discomfort, in revisiting the same wound, only this time with understanding, not blame. Kyle didn't ask Soraya to forget. He asked her to watch, and with time, she did. Second chances don't mean forgetting the past. They mean proving the future will look different. Have you ever wished for a second chance, but weren't ready to earn it? Or have you held on to hurt because you never saw the proof to let it go? One night, in Seattle, that's all it took. Not a plan, not a return scheme, just shared space, and love that never fully left. That night gave them Naya, a child they didn't expect, a lesson they didn't know they needed. It also gave them clarity, that love, even broken once, can be rebuilt, when honesty, presence, and time are invited back into the room. What night changed your life? Not in fireworks, but in a quiet, soul-level way. Some nights are meant to be forgotten, but one night gave them a daughter, a second chance, a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. Don't forget to subscribe. More soulful stories await on Mr. Ross Story Trail.